Today I'm here talking with Dr. Rachel Stevens. She is a migration historian, and she will do a much better job introducing herself than I will. Far away.
Okay, thank you for inviting me along, Ethan. It's great to be here for this episode. So I'm an immigration historian.
Yeah.
So I did my PhD back in 2005. I've been sort of practicing, I guess you could say, as a historian for the past 20 years. My focus is primarily on Australian immigration, but also the US and Canadian immigration systems, especially from post-World War II to
a
the
very
present.
Influential period that has dictated how we live today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm very much interested in public policy and the experiences of immigrants themselves and how they adjusted to a new life in Australia. I'm based at Australian Catholic University in Melbourne. I'm in the Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences. We have a research centre on refugees, humanitarianism and migration studies. So there's a few of us in the research centre, which is great. But, you know, I'm very much interested in policy, and I love having discussions about current policy. And I think it's something that we should do more of. You know, it's really important to sort of sit with the complexity and the ambiguity when it comes to public policy and just be open to divergent opinions, and hopefully we can find some common ground.
Yeah, okay. So it helps, having those diverse opinions or thought processes to actually come to a proper nuanced approach to things. Yeah, or at least pragmatic approach to things, or
I mean, as an academic, I'm not really put in a situation where I have to be pragmatic. I can be idealistic, you know.
Oh, okay.
But just in terms of thinking about a particular policy problem in a new way, or especially using history as a guide to, for example, how we can solve contemporary problems. So, as an example, in terms of the housing crisis, if you think back to the last federal election in May. Especially international students, but migrants more broadly were blamed. They were scapegoated, right?
Yeah.
For housing crisis, the housing crisis. And as an academic, especially as a historian, where my research training is based on, or here's the evidence, formulate an argument and come to a conclusion.
Yeah.
And for me, that is a very helpful process because it means I'm comfortable with the positions I take. It's not just about opinion. Like there's so much opinion nowadays.
You have that confidence because you've done the research.
Yeah, even if I don't have confidence in myself, like it's very grounding to know, well, the evidence backs me up.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to like public speaking. I teach undergraduates here at ACU, and public speaking is something we all have to do, and many of them really struggle with it and haven't necessarily been taught it in high school. And I think if you just believe in the message, not worry so much about how you come across, just believe in the message, have a clear idea and just commit to it. I think that's really important because you're always going to have naysayers, and especially there's always someone who's like, oh, I've got a very particular anecdote, like, oh, my brother-in-law's cousin, he did, it's just like, okay, right? So at least I'm kind of unusual in that I'm a very data-driven historian. Usually historians are much more focused on text for sources, whereas I'm much more focused on data. And so having that very broad, general perspective on a particular trend or social process. So I've got some data here. We were to talk about citizenship rates,
Yeah.
and how it varies across different nationality groups and why that might be the case. So as a historian, I do struggle sometimes. You hear maybe it's an individual story, and that may be true for that person. That's fine, but it doesn't mean it's the case for everyone.
Yeah.
So I think we can learn a lot from history, especially the recent past, so the past 50 years or something, and that for me that provides a lot of comfort. Like we've been here before, we've had housing crises before. Yeah. We've figured out our way through it. And so that's a great source of, I guess, inspiration as well as comfort. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Like we made it through before. Like there's nothing to fret now.
Yes. Yeah. And that's one of the things that really sort of surprised me with the last election was that, all of a sudden immigration was a thing again. Like for so many decades, the focus had been on asylum seekers, especially, especially, so-called boat people. But then out of the blue, it seemed that, international students and migrants more broadly became the target of things that weren't of their making on a topic that's so complex as housing, so many factors involved in housing in this country. And And I just think, if people understood the data, if they looked at the figures, they'd be a lot more relaxed. It's not, if there's something I would say to your listeners or viewers is that, our migration rates are actually, in historical perspective, relatively low. Like we've accepted more immigrants as a proportion of the population
in the past,
like in the late 1960s, most notably. And, in the post-World War II period, we, settled 170,000 displaced persons from the camps in Europe, within a 6-year period, and there were problems with housing. I'm not saying it was smooth sailing.
Yeah, because when you say housing crisis before, it's like, well, you mean this housing crisis.
Exactly.
It's not.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a challenge we faced as a nation prior.
Yes.
And it all depends on, the policies in place to
That's right.
resolve it.
Yes.
Or at least, it's good to help our neighbours or help these foreign countries and give people the opportunity to have a new home and start again.
Yeah.
But there also needs to be those I don't know where I was going with that, but there
No,
needs to be those policies that match it, you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah. And I think, one of the things that really bothered me with the debate around housing and immigration earlier this year was that there was a lot of sort of taking numbers out of context, taking the data out of context, being really sort of alarmist and inflammatory. So I think it's really important that people are data literate in our society and that they're comfortable dealing with numbers because when it comes to immigration statistics, it's actually pretty basic. If you've done primary school maths, you're fine. It's nothing complicated. And it's really important that you're able to, think through the numbers and sort of question some of the commentary. And I think some of the problems we have with news coverage at the moment is that journalists don't have the resources or the time to ask probing questions of politicians.
A common thing happening.
Yeah.
When I think we were talking about before, reaching that bottom dollar.
Yeah.
We don't have to research it. It's an opinion piece. There we go.
Yeah.
Done. But it's going to be posed as an article.
Yes.
Sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that really bothers me when it comes to immigration statistics is the use of this term net overseas migration, NOM. The problem with that term, because you may have heard last year or the year before that, we've got a...
What does that term mean?
Okay, I'll get to that.
So treat me like a person who has no idea.
Okay.
Talk to me. Convince me, I guess.
So it's all arrivals minus all departures. But the problem with the statistic is that it includes working holiday makers, international students, as the same as permanent migrants, right? So in a way, I would say it's actually inflating the number of people who are coming to this country. So if you have like a German backpacker who's here for like 12 months, having a good time, maybe picking some crops in cans.
They're not a threat. They're not a threat.
Yeah,
They're just going to be staying at your sister's house. They're not a...
or providing, a good source of, labour for the growers or, consuming services in places like Cairns. So it's a misleading way of thinking about immigration. So in the past, we used to focus primarily on people who came with a permanent residency visa.
Like that was the threatening thing? Or
No. As in, that was how we understood migration. It was those who come with a visa in which they can settle permanently. We're not talking about people who are coming for a holiday, an extended holiday, or coming to see family, or international students who presumably will leave if when their course finishes. So one of the things that really sort of bothered me was this discussion maybe about 2 years ago, where this net overseas migration figure topped 500,000 people. It was in the news and it was a big brouhaha over it. And what bothered me was that commentators or journalists, they didn't pick up on the fact that A, this figure is misleading, and also B, there was that sort of natural bounce back after COVID. I mean, what we went through. Yeah,
well, because that's another problem that this country sort of built, is that we do rely a lot on foreign work, right?
Yes.
Very, and the evidence has shown, especially during COVID, and it is kind of annoying people still bringing up COVID, but it is everyone had to go home.
Yeah.
All the nurses that were here on temporary work visas, all the, fruit pickers, everyone, right?
Yep.
So there is going to be a jump after that when we start opening the borders up again. That's what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A natural bounce back to equilibrium.
Yeah.
And so there was this sort of artificial bump in the numbers, but now, in the last sort of 12 months or so, the figures have kind of stabilised and are back to sort of pre-COVID levels and everything's fine. But in the meantime, those past sort of 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot of, I would say, quite dangerous language or rhetoric around foreigners. And we've got to be really careful. Like, I think Australia's done a great job of integrating millions of migrants into society without the social unrest we've seen in places like Europe or the US. And I was looking at the percent foreign-born in Australia as of, I think it was 2024. It reached 31.5% foreign-born. And when you include having someone with a parent who was born overseas, it's well over 50%, like 52%. So migration is something that affects most of us. And, you know, what struck me was, you know, what I had considered comparable countries like the US, Canada, the UK, Germany, their rates of foreign-born are far lower than ours.
Yeah.
Like we're in the same ballpark as, you know, a lot of the sort of Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia and Jordan, and they're the kind of, they have a very different immigration model. It's based on bringing in foreign workers and treating them appallingly, and giving them no rights. So, you know, having a overseas born of over 31%, and probably by now it's reached 1/3. It's pretty incredible. I think we should celebrate that we've been able to build this multicultural
that achievement of multiculturalism.
And without, I mean, there have been some race riots. Think back to Cronulla, and I think it was 2004 or 2005. That's a long time ago now.
It is a long time ago, but it is relevant and does ring true, especially in this conversation. You know, it does get brought up a lot.
Cronulla,
like,
okay. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just saying.
Okay.
Well, at least whenever the immigration word gets brought up, everyone's like, Cronulla, they had it right. And it's like, I don't know, did they?
Yeah.
But at the time, as you're saying, you know, I don't think the numbers were that high then either. Were they? I was still pulling them a nappy, but no, I wasn't. I think I was in primary school.
Okay.
Anyway, but no, it's again, it's just people who just seem to be misinformed or don't understand the numbers or don't have beautiful graphs like you do.
Yes, colour-coded. Traffic light colours,
but that does seem to come up of like, well, here's an example of why people are upset with it, Cronulla, you know.
Yeah.
As you just gave, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's a pretty isolating, I mean, what's striking about Cronulla is that it happened, 20 years ago now, and we haven't had race riots like you see in the US or in the UK historically, and yes, we do have this issue of neo-Nazism, neo-fascism, whatever you want to call it.
Midnight Nazi cosplayers.
Yeah. But they are very much a small fringe. They do get a lot of headlines.
Intention, because the media, that's what they want to be talking about.
Exactly. It's clickbait. And but it's not, you know, it's not widespread opinion by any means. I mean, you think about Pauline Hanson. She's been around for nearly 29 years, which is incredible. And I mean, on the one hand, I do admire her longevity and resilience, but
in the political sphere,
it's pretty incredible she's survived this long. But on the other hand, like, her party outside of Queensland really hasn't, you know, gained any traction after all this time, you know?
Yeah. So clearly that sentiment isn't rampant in Australia enough. You know?
No, I mean, it's enough to get a Senate seat or two, you know, maybe a couple of seats in a state
or a federal or whatever. But overall.
But it isn't like you would see in, you know, the Netherlands or in Germany with the AFD. Like, they're major political forces, you know. They're far-right anti-immigration parties, whereas Pauline Hanson, she's always been seen, especially in the South, as a bit of a joke, you know. Maybe not if you're in Queensland. But
I'm from Queensland and she's the queen, all right? What's your tone? No. But
people do vote for her, so she doesn't have a following. But you know, in terms of extending her appeal beyond her, like you know, for example, she tried to get her daughter a seat in the Tasmanian Senate and was unsuccessful. You know, so that sort of says something. You know, that she was unsuccessful to pass that baton along.
There isn't that open appetite for that in Australia.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then if they're going to, it's like, oh, well, maybe I'll just vote Liberal. It doesn't like overly commit me to other rhetoric they seem to be saying or some of the candidates that they put up. There seems to be a bit of a jump there. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's worthwhile. Like, I'm not into, you know, chest thumping, you know, patriotism or nationalism, whatever word you want to use. Like, I'm a very much a pretty cynical person. And I always, like many Australians, would roll my eyes when the Prime Minister would say Australia is the best country in the world. Like, I just don't believe that's the case. But having said that, we do need to recognise achievements where they exist, you know, and especially over the past, I would say 50 years, those since 1975, with the arrival of the first sort of
Vietnamese refugees. I think Australia's done a pretty remarkable job. I mean, there were certainly teething problems in the first few years, there's no doubt about it, when the Vietnamese refugees came, It was a major change in the demographic makeup of the country. Like, we really hadn't seen sort of a substantial number of Asian migrants or refugees come until that point. So I don't want to sort of cover that up or sort of whitewash any kind of blemishes like that. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognise that what the Australian people have done. I mean, I would say it's more the people rather than the government or the policies. It's society at large that should be I would say, proud to an extent that we have been able to integrate millions of foreigners without any kind of political unrest.
Yeah. Go team.
Go team.
I guess what I wanted to ask on that, as like you were saying, these numbers of like 30% migrants and then 51% of children of migrants.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Go
Australia.
Yeah.
Right? Achievement of multiculturalism. On that Bridge by Words project I do, that was it. That's how I thought to talk to you, is that there's this that pattern where I think at least 50% of the people I have spoken to, it's only 10 so far, but they are either a migrant themselves or they are a child of a migrant. And then that does show and that does feed into the successes of Australia, that opportunity that we can provide here. So, why does, I guess this is a question that I've got, why do you think Australia has had so many migrant background politicians, and what does that say about who we are?
Yeah.
I know that if we look at the grand scale, 1901, maybe not so much.
Sure.
But in today's, the last 20 years, the achievements that we've made where the representative can be reflective of their community, and that is either a migrant or a child of a migrant.
Yes.
So from your end, why do we think that is?
I guess there are many reasons that are possible. So for one, especially if you're a child of a migrant, there is that sort of expectation that you go and achieve academically and succeed and, go to university, perhaps get a law degree. And this is obviously the classic pathway into Parliament. That law degree, you become like a staffer, political staffer, and then move into public office yourself. So there is that sort of cultural aspect to it.
It's like we came here for you, so you better you better make our sacrifices worth it.
And it's real. It's real. You ask
I've got many friends that are like that, and they're like, that's my parents are hard, but
absolutely. But I was thinking about this last night in terms of how representative our parliaments are, and you would know a lot more about this than I do. But one thing I've noticed with the federal parliament is that I would say it's not as representative.
Yeah.
As the population as a whole, and that would come down to, I guess, just how difficult it is to get pre-selection, right?
Because of this internal party stuff.
Exactly. Whereas I would say at state level and even more so at local level, it's much more representative. You have people who, might be first-generation migrants themselves and have been able to gain office. So that's pretty incredible. I
do notice that difference.
Yeah.
When I'm looking for people to interview and you're scrolling through like the council website.
Yes.
And you see all the councillors, you're like, oh, wow, that's much more diverse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when it comes to people who are, in the top office of Australia, people who are cabinet members, there aren't as many as you would hope.
Because there's still those party loops to jump through.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And I would say the Australian Parliament in general is not representative of Australian society, whether it's based on race, ethnicity, occupational background, educational background. Like it's very skewed towards university graduates with law degrees, people who sort of go through the sort of the Young Labor or the Young Liberals and who go through that sort of pipeline. It's not as open, I guess, to outsiders as perhaps the American system, which is much more decentralised as a political process. So I would say the greatest change is happening at the local level and to a lesser extent at state level. Yeah. And that's really an important change. And maybe in like 10, 15 years' time, we'll see that transition to, having federal like cabinet members who are, aside from Penny Wong, cabinet members who do represent their communities, And I was also looking at APS data, so the Australian Public Service, because it's not just the politicians, it's also the policymakers, the bureaucrats, and I was looking
at people who do the work.
The people who do the work, for whoever's in power. And again, it's not as diverse as you would expect. You know, it is the number of people coming from non-European backgrounds is lower than the Australian average. And I guess part of it is the fact that most bureaucrats in the APS are based in Canberra, and Canberra is not typical of Australia in terms of its demography.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also in terms of, you know, most migrants do settle in places like Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane. So, you know, there just aren't the opportunities, I guess, if you're living outside of Canberra to gain a decent APS job. I did notice that the leading country of birth for APS employees not born in Australia are from India, and followed by England and then China. So, I mean, you know, talking about immigration, I mean, one of the greatest changes, and this is happening at breakneck speed, is the number of Indian migrants who've come to Australia. I'm sort of changing the topic a little bit, but...
how dare you?
Yeah.
No, you're good.
It's got to be a structured interview.
No, you're good.
I mean, this is something that we don't necessarily know because... and this has happened really since the 2021 census. So this is like very recent ABS data that's coming through. And of course, there's going to be a census next year and we won't get the results until the following year. So it's always a bit of a lag. But, you know, within the past 10 years, like the number of people born in India who live in Australia has doubled from like 500,000 or 450,000 to 900,000. And that was in 2024. So I reckon either now or next year we'll have over 1 million Indian-born migrants living in Australia. And why that matters is that will make them the largest diaspora community in the country. And a quarter of those million Indian-born migrants live in Victoria. And I would say many in Melbourne and the outer suburbs of Melbourne especially. So, and of course, as you would appreciate, you know, a country like India has this sort of huge pool, you know, of people who are keen to migrate and start again and, you know, send remittances back to their parents or family back home. So it's a positive change, not just in terms of improving the lives of the migrants and their families, but also, you know, remittances become a really important source of income for those countries in terms of helping, you know, break the cycle of dependency on foreign aid and that kind of thing. So, and yes, I said, this has happened in the past 10 years and it hasn't really been addressed. You know, like it's, if you live in Melbourne, like you do see it around. Evidence of this, or if you live in Sydney as well. But
you see some meme videos here and there of like, it pops up on the feed of like, this train station in a outer suburb. This isn't actually India. There's those jokes, but but so it is kind of noticed by some people. Whether that's being used as weaponized the wrong way by some of our, not ours, but those Nazi folks, right?
That's right.
As evidence for them to have a justification for their actions or their opinions. I don't know, but it is a big thing. I don't know where I was going with that, but
no, it's a good point that you make about how
it is seen.
It's seen
and people are
mimicked
aware,
and perhaps misused as well. So we've got to be careful, I think. So it's a rapid change that's happened within 10 years, and I think policymakers and politicians, by extension, need to be mindful of how best to manage this transition because it's just going to continue. There are no limits on the number of migrants from India, you know, like the United States has nationality caps, you know, whereas Australia is just, it's nationality blind. It's based on skills or family connections. So I think it's really important that policymakers, especially in the Victorian Parliament, are mindful of, you know, what could be happening in 10 years' time. It's not what's happening in 3 years' time. This is one of the big problems with immigration is that we often, as a policy area, it's often very focused on the next sort of year. That they have,
or at least the term.
The term at most. And really we should be having a much longer vision. And that's what was the case in the sort of the 1940s, 1950s, this idea of, you know, populating perish. There was this great concern about not having a large enough population base to defend the country should somewhere, you know, Indonesia, Japan invade. So there was this sort of grand vision, this grand plan for immigration and how it would relate to building the country. Whereas I think nowadays it's just year by year. And
a bit more reactionary
and like what's the ultimate goal here, you know, in terms of thinking about forward planning for the next sort of generation, that would be the optimal situation, I would say, but it's always hard if, you know, you're in the bureaucracy just trying to navigate with competing pressures and the political landscape and
if you say the wrong thing, oh my God, there goes your career.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's no... People aren't being fearless about these things. They're just sort of...
It's... there isn't that sort of bold thinking that I think is required. And this applies to other areas of policymaking as well, whether it be, education or healthcare. And it's very easy, for me as an academic just to sit here and say, oh, you should be doing this, and far removed from the realities of life in the public service. But I think it's also important to note that, okay, if you're going to do a short-term plan, there will be consequences you need to plan for down the track, not just in terms of infrastructure, but in terms of, ensuring social cohesion. That it's not something we should take for granted. It needs to be managed, cultivated, like you would a garden. Or
utilised better.
Yeah.
Rather than just, all right, come on in. I know there is those, certain visa holders where you have to spend a certain period of time in the regions.
Yes.
Or Tasmania, which is still a region somehow. Picking fruit or doing a regional job to try and keep those communities alive. But then they're still at risk, these regional areas. So what if there was more of an incentive for people to move there? Not just migrant people.
Yeah.
But there is that problem that we have in Australia where there is these social media people joking about, oh, this train station's too full of Indians.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's because there's this dependency on a centralised Australia where everything revolves around a capital city.
Yeah.
So maybe if there was a big thinking idea to decentralise Australia a bit and boost up our, Ballarat, Shepparton, Toowoomba, and all the cities in between, all the towns in between. I don't know if there's something there, not just for migrants, but to sort of revive or keep them alive.
Yeah.
These regional communities. I don't know. There's something there.
There is something there.
You know what I mean?
I fully agree.
Not just on a temporary thing. It's like, oh, you have to spend a certain amount of days or a few years here if you're a doctor, coming here. Yeah. If it's more like, all right, we want to incentivize people to put down their roots here. Yeah. Make a home here. Obviously not, change it and turn parts of Australia into an exclave of other countries, but parts that better utilise this multiculturalism idea or something. I don't know, there's something there.
There is something there.
Solve it for me. You're the smart one.
Well, I mean, there is that example of Nhill in Western Victoria. Have you heard of Nhill? It's on the way to Adelaide if you're driving from Melbourne.
Okay.
And
I think I've probably driven through, but keep going.
Yeah, and it's worthwhile stopping next time. They have this duck produce factory called Lover Duck. You may have seen Lover Ducks in the freezer in your supermarket.
Oh, that's where they're based. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And their factory is heavily staffed by Karen refugees from Myanmar. And it's quite a well-known example of successful refugee resettlement in a country town. And because they're all together, they can still maintain their culture,
their language. Isolated.
Exactly. Yeah. So there is, and it's, provided an important source of labour for the Nhill community, which otherwise would have been, like many other country towns, just, struggling.
Moving to the cities.
Yeah,
and then,
exactly. Yeah. And so this is a great case study, I guess, of successful resettlement of refugees. And this is where you see, a lot of people will say they worry about ghettos being formed, and you've got to remind people we're not the United States, and ghettos are formed because of residential segregation policies. It's not because people choose to.
Or not having the government social safety nets that we have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really important that I think people who are born in Australia understand that, for migrants to live within their own community, people who share the same faith, speak the same language, this is a good thing for Australia as a whole in terms of, social supports and networks. It helps ease settlement or integration into Australian society. And if you were a migrant yourself, imagine you chose to migrate, for example, to Cairo. You arrive in Cairo and you learn about this, Australian expat community in a neighbourhood. You would naturally gravitate there because that's where you're going to get all the resources. I think it's really important to sort of give people the same amount of sort of latitude as you would expect for yourself, just to have that level of compassion.
Well, why do all Australians go to Bali?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question.
There's a good example of what you just said.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly, yeah. But yeah, I fully agree that we need to decentralise the population. We're too highly concentrated in a handful of cities, especially on the eastern seaboard.
That puts all the infrastructure under pressure.
Yep.
Yeah. There's the problem.
That is a problem. And, a population of 27 million right now, soon enough will be 30 million. We're a big country in terms of population. We've got to stop thinking.
We're just tucked in the corner, though.
I know. We've got to stop thinking like we're this little tiny population. We are actually quite a substantial population size, and we can sort of spread out and enjoy, I guess, the virtues of, living in the regions. I grew up in a regional area and, it's a pretty good life growing up as a teenager and child.
I did a bit as well. And I think it humbles you.
Yes.
The amount of horse poo you have to shovel. That was my upbringing. But yeah. I lost the point. Thanks.
No, that's okay. But it's not, especially now that many people can work from home.
That was another thing I was talking about. Yeah.
So our jobs, our economies are very different to what they used to be, and people don't necessarily need to come to the office. And especially for major cities, or major towns, I should say, like Shepparton, like Ballarat, like Bendigo in Victoria, or Wollongong, Newcastle, other places in New South Wales. We already have the infrastructure there. These towns have been around a long time. They have a lot going for them, in terms of, climate or natural beauty, so it shouldn't be that hard a case to make. I mean, right. I wish there were more universities in regional Australia, that would make my life a lot easier. Because, universities are heavily concentrated in the cities, and it's just like, why, And
the only time there is one is when it's like a very specialised thing.
Yeah.
I think one that comes to mind is like Hatton or Gatton or something.
Oh, Gatton in University of Queensland?
Yeah.
Is that like agriculture
it's like
and
veterinary thing?
Yeah.
I think my sister was going to go there, yeah. That's one that came to mind.
Yeah.
And then they're just very specialised for that thing in that region, which is good, but, you're only attracting those industries and those people and those fields.
Yeah.
But if we could diversify it a bit more.
Yes.
Well, why can't we have more capital cities?
Well, that's a good question. I was thinking that, it's a bit of a colonial hangover that each state has a capital city.
Yeah, that too. Or like even, I don't know, promoting more sister cities.
Yeah. Ah, okay, right.
Not sister cities. I don't know. What do you mean? Not satellite cities. There's a term. I can't remember it. But I guess that too. What you were going on. I cut you off. Go, fire away.
No. So I guess satellite cities are important. So you do have the opportunity to do a once-a-week commute if necessary, but not having to go in every day if you have a work-from-home job.
I've got to be excited with your colonial capital city thing.
Yes.
Back to that.
Yes,
Sorry, that's what I mean.
Well, yeah, I mean, the idea that each colony has its capital city, and that was, we federated 124 years ago, and perhaps now it's time to think about maybe we need another major city somewhere, between Sydney and Brisbane, or between Melbourne and Canberra. It's a bit of a colonial legacy that you can only understand it if you understand the colonial rivalries in the 19th century Australia. And
like all that tension between all right, well, Melbourne's the capital. No, Sydney's going to be the capital. All right, fine.
Yeah.
Midway.
Well, Canberra, actually, that's a really good example of you can just, manufacture a city from scratch.
That's what I mean. There's a history and example of that happening. So why can't we do that more?
Yeah.
To relieve pressure on the cities.
Yes.
And then if everyone's worried about, there's not going to get enough funding, it's like, we'll move there.
Yeah.
And then they'll have no choice but to put funding in.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, we have to put the train there.
Yes.
Because people live there.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as I said before, a lot of these cities already, or major country towns already exist. They already are on the train network, places like Shepparton, for example, or Ballarat and Bendigo. So it's a perfectly viable proposition. It's just how we're raised, in this society, that we need to be so concentrated. It's always about, the jobs are in the big city. It's like, well, what jobs? What are the jobs that you have to go to the office for still, and I think we just need to sort of embrace that sort of technological change and really make it work for us rather than against us, and just take some of the pressure off living in a capital city. That's a whole separate issue. I'm sure you've got an episode lined up to discuss urban planning.
If you've got someone to talk to, if you recommend an urban planner, I'd love to. I guess on that, talking about, what happens when we stop thinking of migrants as economic inputs and start seeing them as civic contributors?
Yeah.
Because they do. They pay their taxes, they work, they contribute to our economy.
Yeah.
They keep a lot of businesses afloat.
Yes.
And some of those businesses may be taking advantage of some of these people. But anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
That creates a class system in a way.
Yeah.
But that's a different, we don't have to talk about that. But I think, what was the question? Yeah, what happens when we stop thinking about migrants as economic inputs and start seeing them as civic contributors?
Yeah. So what you mentioned, I mean, it's really been since the late 80s that we've seen migrants pretty much exclusively as economic inputs. I mean,
as opposed to a part of the country.
Yeah. So before that, there was a lot of family reunification. So the idea is that you bring your family members, or you bring, entire family units over and start again as new settlers, as they were called.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to be fair, like in the post-World War II period, there was, I guess, a view that migrants were like factory fodder, to use that expression, that they would work in the factories to sort of for 2 years to sort of pay back their passage by sea. But, they were seen as citizens in waiting. They weren't seen as just people you could import, use their labour and discard them when they were no longer needed. And I think it's really important that the Australian government sees migrants as, as giving them the opportunity to settle should they wish to do so,
Yeah, not making it seem so jump through all these hoops or so far on the distance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, like...
on the horizon, sorry.
Yeah, and so people who are on bridging visas or are stuck on sort of a string of sort of temporary visas, like this is no way to live. Like if you have every intention, if you really want to settle in Australia, that should be a possibility,
Yeah.
And the other thing is, with citizenship, I remember back in the early 80s, that Australia's citizenship laws were the most inclusive, generous, expansive, however you want to put it. It was 2 years of residency and that was it. That's all you needed. Whereas now it's 4 years, and of course you got to do the test, the citizenship test, and all these other hoops you have to jump through. So I think it's really important that we encourage citizenship, and we've seen what happens if you're not a citizen with what's happened in the United States. As a historian,
you get used and abused and chucked out
and deported for no reason, right? You have no rights, and I think it's really important that migrants, for some migrants, if they want to take out Australian citizenship, they'll need to renounce their other citizenship. So that's quite a emotional decision. There's a sacrifice there.
Is it dependent on the other country, or is that something we do here? Where it's like, you're only Australian? Is that what we do?
No. So Australia allows dual citizenship, whereas some countries, most notably People's Republic of China, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, they do not allow dual citizenship. So if you acquire Australian citizenship, you automatically renunciate your, birth citizenship. So for some people, they don't want to do that because they want to go home maybe, or keep the options open.
Yeah.
That's a complicated picture. But I guess something I would say is that you got to protect yourself legally from the government. Like in Australia, we think of the government as this sort of very benevolent, paternal figure in our lives. If there's a natural disaster, they'll give us money and they'll help us. And whereas as a historian, I see the darker side of the state apparatus, all the things the state can do to people, if left unchecked. And I think it's really important that that people, migrants especially, that it's a conscious decision. If they don't want to take out citizenship, that they're aware of the risks. And we've seen this previously when New Zealand nationals who had been in Australia since they were like infants were deported because they had been charged and convicted of a violent offence. Like that's the situation you find yourself in if you don't take out citizenship. You are
this country is the only life they know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and they're still at risk of being deported.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really important that migrants are aware that there is an inherent risk when you don't take out citizenship in the country in which you live and intend to live in for the rest of your life. So, can you remind me of where we were going with that? Units. Yes. So I think it's really important that, we see the value of migrants beyond their labour. Like it's not just, supporting businesses or working in, unpleasant jobs. It's the whole person who migrates, whether they come to schools or go to universities or start a family or meet someone, fall in love. Like I've done research on intercultural relationships and how you navigate when two people come together, fall in love, but they come from very different sort of cultural backgrounds, So, I think it's, we just need to acknowledge that we are admitting the person in their entire complexity, and there is much to be gained from that. And so I think it's something that many large organisations need to be a lot more proactive with trying to make better use of the cultural diversity in this country, rather than seeing it as something that needs to be managed or minimised. Actually, it's a source of great I guess, importance, and it's a way in which Australia can remain a much more sort of nimble, vigorous, agile country as we enter sort of the second quarter of this century, and that we are a lot more reflective of the region in which we live. I think it's a wonderful thing that we've had so many migrants from Southeast Asia and more recently South Asia choose to settle in Australia, so that we're much more culturally integrated. We have those kind of cultural skills in which we can sort of navigate our region rather than just trying to isolate ourselves as being like an outpost of Great Britain.
Yeah. We're a country in Asia.
Exactly. So when Paul Keating said that in the 90s, it was outrageous,
Yeah.
And, it's relatively recent that, Australians saw themselves as distinct from British, Australian citizenship only emerged as a legal concept in 1948, which is not that long ago, and I would say up until the 80s, many people who had been born and raised in Australia just saw themselves as overseas Britons, So I think it's a major sort of cultural and existential change we've undergone. And we just need to make sure that we sort of get the most out of it as we sort of progress throughout this century, because
the problem we run into is, they'll come here, they'll study here, they'll live here, and then if we're not going to let them in, all that education, for example, we've invested into them, or the knowledge a business has put into them of how to run their business, operate within that, then the door's still open and they'll leave.
Yep.
And then that's just a giant brain drain and a waste of time for everyone here.
Yeah.
As an example.
Yes. Yeah.
So there is that cycle of that.
Yeah. And coming back to international students, like when John Howard was in power, like it was designed, it wasn't an accident that you'd have international students and then they'd be offered a range of visas upon graduation. So it was a way to manage the flow of migration to ensure that migrants had Australian qualifications, so that would make recognition very easy. They'd already been sort of, acculturated into Australian society, and often they would have job offers, so they would go straight into the workforce. So it was designed by the Howard government to ease migrants from early adulthood, to sort of ease them through the whole process. So by seeing international students as just, cash cows for the higher education sector or the vocational sector, that really sort of misses the point of what actually John Howard...
That's kind of what that turned into, isn't it? Yeah.
It's just, money in, money out. And then, universities became dependent on this revenue stream, and everything just kind of got a bit out of control. So we're going through this very kind of painful course correction. Universities are sort of contracting and, shedding staff, and this is very traumatic for many of my colleagues, around the country. So I don't want to minimise the effect, but I would say perhaps the higher education sector just got a bit too bullish. They were just too expansive, too cocky.
That cartoon money symbols in the eyes.
Yeah.
Oh, cha-ching.
Yeah. And, realistically, it was only ever going to be for a short period of time, because we've seen already that universities in China especially, but also in Singapore, they have invested so much into their higher education system. So these countries are now attracting international students themselves, right? So, elites or sort of people from middle-class backgrounds in, sub-Saharan Africa are going to, Ningbo in China to study there. So we need to appreciate that, we do not have a monopoly on quality higher education.
No, because there was a lack of reinvestment.
Yeah.
For that money.
Yes.
You may have had that fat pig of immigrant students. Yeah. And then you just squandered the money.
Yeah. On these very beautiful buildings that no one comes to anymore.
Yeah. I'm not being rude. The room we're in right now, they could have at least bought black screws to blend it a little bit better.
That's pretty funny. Yeah.
I'm not. Yeah.
Well, that's the state of higher education right there. But anyway.
I'm thankful for the space. And I'd love to maybe use it again one day, but maybe a few black screws.
Yeah. Higher education, so
yeah. There's some things to fix there.
Absolutely.
Well, hopefully our local representatives see this and fix it.
Yes.
Maybe. Don't know. Anyway, we'll move on to another question. Or
sure.
More to say on that topic? No. I guess if you could reframe the public conversation on migration, what would what would be the centre of it?
That's a good question. I think we need to reframe our thinking.
Mm-hmm. So
rather than seeing immigrants as a burden or a opaque things. They're, a threat, source of competition. They give us a great deal. And just purely from an economic perspective, thinking about the COVID era, if it wasn't for international migration, once borders reopened, Australia would have entered a recession, right?
Yeah.
So, and thinking more broadly with sort of dealing with the aging of the population, as baby boomers sort of move into
retirement. That grey wave is coming.
That grey wave is coming. And so we need to be prepared for that. And it's really crude to think of people as just units of labour like we've talked about before. However, we have to think about what it actually means in terms of our quality of life. And I think as someone who was born in 1980, I do have this early childhood experience of tough times, with recessions and, we just didn't have much stuff and that was fine. Like we were fed. I had hand-me-downs, that's fine. But now we have such a high quality of living just because I've taken it a bit for granted, and it needs to be, we need to have a growing tax base, right? And especially because there are so many loopholes in the tax code for people to sort of minimise their taxation burden. We need to keep growing the economy. I think it's really important. And think about the costs of what happens when we don't have migrants coming in. And we did experience it a little bit during COVID, but I think also at the time people weren't themselves, and a lot was going on. Maybe it was lost on some people, but
maybe the effects, or some people didn't feel the effects as much because we were locked at home.
Yeah.
Imagine having to still do your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And 30%, not 30%, but whatever the percentage is.
Yeah, 31.5, yeah.
Yeah, what if they weren't here to fill the gaps in our economic system,
Yeah, yeah. And the important jobs they perform, especially if you go to any public hospital. Mm-hmm. You hear Irish nurses talking, we have a lot of nurses coming over from Ireland, better conditions, and historically that's what Australia could offer migrants, like just a better quality of life. Like, yes, you may have to leave everything that's familiar and your family and friends behind, but you can earn a good salary or wage, beautiful weather, get your own home, your kids can go get a good education, and we've got to make sure we can maintain that promise. And in order to maintain that promise, we need to actually ensure that we have a growing tax base, that we have enough people working to support our ageing population, and that's a real thing. We can't just pretend it doesn't exist.
Well, that's kind of what I guess the policies are doing at the moment by bringing in numbers. Mm-hmm. They're just like, we'll just need more. Like that's how I guess we've. Yeah. Well, that's how they say that we've avoided this recession.
Yes.
That other countries are dealing with right now.
Yep.
Is because we have these migration numbers coming in. That is filling in, or it's bringing money that could boost the GDP.
Yes. I'm not sure the politicians have done a good enough job at articulating the case. Yeah. Like I think in 1945, the politicians were very clear and made a good case. We either populate or we perish, right? That's a very compelling argument. Either you procreate.
Why isn't that being uttered right now?
Well, exactly.
In a sense, because it's like, all right, look, we are going to have harder times because of all the tail end of this COVID business, and the rest of the world is still dealing with it. At the moment, this is kind of the only way to at least keep the boat afloat, bring all these numbers in. I don't know whether that should be coupled with, policies or infrastructure projects or services that actually affect people, so that this burden, people call a burden of being cut off by an Indian driver, or whatever. Maybe if there was something to ease that a bit, I don't know, like just
a bit of context to be aware of, because
they seem to be avoiding it, or because they don't want to be labelled as you're just what about us Australians? It's like, well, they're going to be Australians too. Maybe that could be coupled. I don't know. Where do we go?
Yeah, no, you make a good point. So I remember when Kevin Rudd came to power, he was a bit of an advocate for a so-called Big Australia, and it was all reported at the time, 50 million people living in Australia by like 2050 or whatever it was,
We're on track, I guess.
Yeah, maybe.
Feels like it.
Maybe. But, he was just criticised, by everyone. And so I think politicians are very risk averse for good reason. Mm-hmm. But we need... this is perhaps a bigger question, that we do need to have political leaders who... I do miss the visionaries. Whether you're a favour of Whitlam or Fraser, And our politicians have really disappointed for a number of years. And I understand it's their job to stay in power. Well, that's what they aim to do. But it'd be good to have some leaders who can articulate a vision for the country that's
whether
beyond.
You agree with it or not, there needs to be something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's their job to make the case.
Yeah.
And it's a sort of a broader point. I think we've lost this capacity to engage in dialogue or debate about complex issues, you know. And there's this fear that, you know, it's if you do engage in any kind of polarizing issue, whether it be like, you know, immigration, refugees or asylum seekers, it's just going to be a political cost. Like there's no gain for you. So I remember when Barack Obama came to power, 2008, like he just...
Fine, so do I. I was in high school.
Yep.
It was exciting.
It was exciting. And he came to power with this fresh vision of what America could become, you know?
Whether he met that vision, that's a whole other topic.
But he was a good communicator.
Yeah.
And maybe he put too much emphasis on just being able to talk the words rather than being able to walk the walk as well. But, you know, I mean, he's just a 1 in a million character. But we also have similar leaders ourselves, you know, people who...
Kevin Rudd, handball champion of the world.
But, you know, it's just about having a vision and making a case and just, you know, persuading people. That art of persuasion has gone because now we just sort of yell at each other, you know. There's no dialogue. It's just like one person talking over the other and...
it's this or that. There's no nuance, middle ground, pragmatic.
Yeah.
Like I understand you said that earlier. You know, like you're in the fortunate position where you don't have to be pragmatic about things. You have the data and this is the idea as an academic. But like how can we close that gap between everyone and get them on board and, you know, all right, well, you're going to have to give up this, but you get this in return. Yeah. You know, what's the pragmatic, what's the give and take?
Yes.
Because you can't have everything. And I understand that we are in Australia and the rest of the world seems to look at us and go, wow, that looks pretty good. Standard of living. There's a point there. I have a bad habit of doing that.
No, it's good to go with it.
You know, it's...
I've been doing some research on Whitlam and Medicare recently and, you know, he was such a... I wish I had been alive when he was around, you know, as leader. And I don't want to make this partisan, but, you know, he had some flaws with his health policy. I'm not going to deny that. But he just saw a policy that would fix the problem of people who do not have any health insurance. Yeah. Like, were not going to be covered in any way. And so he just found a compromise solution that will get the AMA, the doctors' lobby, on board. I mean, he did have some problems with financing and, you know, that's a separate issue. But it's just about... like, what are you willing to sacrifice to get second best outcome, you know? Rather than being so focused on, you know, the optimal outcome, just being willing to sort of take a step back and think, well, if we did this instead, we could get like 80% of what we want, you know? And just having that sort of awareness, I guess, of the cost. So going back to migration, you know, it's for people to have an awareness of not just what migrants give us, but what Australia would be like if we didn't have any migrants. Imagine that. And I think that's pretty...
When's my Uber Eats getting?
I mean, could you imagine takeaway? Like thinking about, you know, Australia back in 1945 or 42 or whatever. Like it was pretty, you know, we often go back to cuisines, which is very sort of, you know, superficial way of thinking about it. But it does have some resonance. We all love food, you know. Just in terms of, we can see the contribution of migrants through the food we eat.
Do you want pizza or fish and chips? That's it.
Yeah, that will be it.
That would have been it, yeah?
Yeah. So, you know, just being a bit more sort of conscious of how so much of our society is just built on the migrants who've come, you know?
Yeah.
And I think most people do have a migrant in their family history at some point, you know? And so you can just think about, you know, your ancestors' journey. If you're not a migrant yourself or your parents aren't migrants, now just thinking about things that they sacrificed to come to a new land on the other side of the world, where at that time it would have been, you know, a one-way ticket. You're not coming back, you know, just to get out of the slums of Manchester or wherever it might have been.
Yorkshire,
yep. And to have, you know, an opportunity for better health, better work life, you know, opportunities for your children. Like these are pretty it baffles me when people are like, oh, we need to cut down on immigration. It's like, well, where's your compassion? Like, do you understand what migrants are trying to escape? Like, wouldn't you do the exact same thing?
Yeah. There's a lack of understanding or ability to see what they're going through.
Yeah, lack of empathy, lack of knowledge as well, you know. And again, this comes back to news coverage, I would say, like, network television, like the main sort of commercial networks don't do a great job at going into the depth of, why people are trying to flee a particular crisis or
not anymore,
or poverty or, inequality, beyond the sort of the major conflicts that are happening at the moment. So, I mean, I do hope that we are lucky that we have SBS, and SBS has a number of English language news programs from overseas that go into a lot of detail, whether it be Al Jazeera or Deutsche Welle or whatever it might be, or BBC, and they do provide a bit more depth, in terms of why people are trying to flee, because, these terrible conditions. And I think, it's really important to that's one of the things I try to do as an educator, for undergraduate students, is to try to facilitate and model empathy for people who are very different to you. It's very easy to be empathetic to someone who's just like you, but to have empathy for someone who thinks quite differently to you, very different opinions on things you might take quite personally, whether it be like women's rights, gay rights, whatever, and still have empathy, and I think that's a really important thing that we need to sort of just continually just remind ourselves, because otherwise we get quite caught up in our own lives,
Our own perspectives.
Our own perspective, which is understandable, but when it comes to these kind of really complex public policy areas, we just got to sort of, for me, it's always comforting to stick to the facts, stick to the evidence, and just go from that. Because in a way, it kind of neutralises my own subjectivity, I guess, in dealing with this issue.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can do more of this,
I hope so too.
Translate all the facts and the figures and the statistics into a more casual, approachable format. I guess that's my goals with whatever this is. Not whatever this is. I mean, like whatever this has been uploaded to.
Okay.
Channel name pending or whatever.
Okay.
That's what I mean.
Okay.
Because there is too much room for people to fill in the gaps and make their own narrative,
Yeah.
and spoil hate, bring on hate or...
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you just look at the facts and you look at the certain policies and you look at this and you go, oh, that's what's actually happening.
Yeah.
All right, well, maybe there's nothing to be scared of.
That's how I take it. That's what I'm getting at. That's how I've been trained.
I mean? Not everyone either has the time or the patience to read all of it, or are not, a part of a university, or it's not their job.
Yeah, I mean, I am very fortunate.
That's what I mean.
Yes.
That's what I mean.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So if there's a way, this could be a way to do it, a start to like boil it all down so it's a consumable piece of information.
Yes.
Yeah?
I agree. I totally agree.
Let's make some Simpsons memes out of this conversation,
Yeah.
Yeah, if that's...
Yeah. And one thing I was thinking of, this is kind of changing the topic, but with...
Do it, I don't care. Change the topic.
You can edit this out.
No.
Just with the move against DEI, diversity...
Inclusion and equality?
Yeah.
Oh, no, wait.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Inclusion, there we go.
And, Australia often sort of mimics trends that happen in the US.
Yep.
Not rote, but there is an element of things sort of having an influence, even if it's just delayed a few years. And I do sort of wonder about what impact that will have in Australia, because I've been thinking about minority rights, the right to maintain your own language, practice your own faith if it's not Christianity, all these things that I guess are issues that need to be addressed in any kind of multicultural society. And it comes back to giving people, I guess, full access and opportunities, to engage in that kind of civic leadership or political leadership. And for, individuals, if they wish to get that sort of access to public office and those kind of things. And I do worry about, and this is sort of something I'm just sort of musing on at the moment, about the impacts of Trumpian sort of anti-DEI policies and how that will affect Australia. I mean, right now with an Albanese government, it probably won't have much of an impact, but if there was to be a coalition government next term, if that would sort of filter through.
Definitely be stripped in some capacity if they got
Yeah. And I think it's really important. I mean, I think in the US, the DEI policies were we're more sort of extensive than they are in Australia.
A bit over the top.
I mean, it's not really my place to say.
No, well, I'll say it. Like it feels, yeah. On their end, there's it's a very pendulum country.
Sure. Yes.
It swings that far that way, and then everyone gets mad, and then it swings back this way, and they have a very hard problem trying to find that middle ground.
Yes.
That pragmatic approach.
Yes.
Hence Trump, being such a product of that country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully nothing like that happens here in Australia. If that makes you feel easy, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just because we have so many checks and balances, as well as there's this culture of, I got my shit to do. I got to go to work. I don't have time to think about.
That is true.
Trans bathrooms. The same way US people do.
Yes.
It'd be wasted energy and time.
Yes.
At least that's my perspective on it. The differences between Australia and the US.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the power of the presidency. Like, we just don't have an equivalent in Australia. That is true. And Trump is a force to be reckoned with, of course. But just thinking, I work in a university, and of course we do have we do have equity programs for individuals who may not have the same opportunities that the mainstream has. And I just think it's really important to be mindful in terms of a conversation about migration, and especially for people who come on humanitarian visas, like their poverty rates are very high, like 44% of people on a humanitarian visa live in poverty. So they, of course, do not have the same sort of chances as the rest of the population. We just need to be sort of cognizant of, I guess, threats that are sort of possibly coming in the future. Like, I do try to think about what could happen in the future a little bit, in terms of emerging trends, discourses, that
and
kind
that
of thing.
Probably comes in the risk of if we normalise their culture too much in this country, then then we could probably fall down that trap.
Yeah.
Thanks, Howard. Because we used to make a lot of Australian stuff. And they signed that free trade agreement of Australia has to consume this much American media. And that's probably why we're dealing with it more. We hear so much about their country.
Yep.
And people get conflated and think they're the same thing. And Australian Constitution, it's like, well, have you read it?
Yeah.
It's not about what it's just about the states' rights. I'm sorry if I cut you off.
No.
But it's that. We could. There is that risk.
Yeah.
You're right.
So I do.
But on the DEI stuff, DEI, in this country, if it's not like what they did over there, this reactionary thing, but if it's more of a way to integrate those who have moved here, is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, just making sure that people, that left to in a very laissez-faire society, like there are going to be inequalities that will creep up, and we need to the state needs to intervene to sort of manage those inequalities as they emerge. And when I think about Australia, it was conceived as a nation that would be like this workers' paradise, this workers' utopia. We, had so many firsts when it came to the labour union movement in this country, in terms of the global standing. So I think it's really important that we just sort of be mindful that inequalities are always going to crop up, and we just need to the state needs to intervene, and citizenship support policies that manage and minimise inequality, because left to our own devices, we're actually going to create an underclass without realising it. And I think it's really important that people who may not have the education or the power or the capital to speak for themselves, that that they know they have people in their corner. And it sort of comes back to the point about minority rights and being a strong advocate for people who are not the majority. And I think in Australia, we need to be, I think in the US, in North America, like Canada and the US, I think there's greater awareness of minority cultures and their values and contributions and how they need to be protected. Whereas in Australia, we kind of think of the country as being a bit homogenous in a way. Like, yes, we have migrants, but we all become Australian. Yeah. I think it's really important
we're this ethnic blob.
Yeah. So I think it's important that we, remain, like for me as an academic, as an advocate, that, we're very clear about the goals we have in terms of protecting those who are at risk of, exploitation or, social isolation, not being able to achieve their full potential, because, the stats on migrant outcomes are not great, especially for humanitarian visa holders and family reunification visa holders. So it's really important. Like, I know I said at the start that, we should be proud of, the great things that Australia has done in resettling so many millions of migrants. But it's an ongoing project. Like, it's never finished, and it's a very messy project as well, and very complex. So there's no straight or simple answers. But it's always about, just trying to ensure that Australia can achieve its original goal, which for me is having this kind of equal society, That's the Labor tradition, and I think we just need to be reminded of, what our founders had envisaged for this country.
Whether theirs may have been buried in certain, prejudices of the time.
Oh, of course.
But understandably, reframing it or rewording it or polishing it up for today's standards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we have so much creeping inequality as it is with housing, with so much wealth being accrued through house ownership.
Yeah.
And so I do worry about how wealth, especially wealth, not so much income, but wealth inequalities have really picked up in the last couple of decades. And as a historian, I know that, societies can only withstand so much inequality before there's social unrest. We can't just, I mean, this is I guess a topic for an episode on housing.
Yeah, we can. Well, on that front, it's this country at least is built in a way where you get just enough to make sure you're okay. Yeah. And you can't focus on how things are becoming unequal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of how they're doing it. If we'll just keep everyone just above water, they can't get too mad at us and ask for reform or change things in a certain way. Or if that's how it feels. And then on that front of I guess immigration, where it's, the White Australia policy initially of we can't let them in because they'll take our jobs.
Yes.
It's a zero-sum game.
Yep.
And then we changed the policy and it didn't fall apart.
Yeah.
The country didn't break.
Yep.
So I guess on the modern sense, it's more, I don't know where I'm going, but there's a string somewhere of these people come in and they want to work here. They want to be a part of Australia, and we should give them that right in a better form than this kind of class system there is because of visa statuses and this and that.
Yeah.
And, oh no, you're on this kind of visa and this visa, and you can only work this many hours because of this. But God, I'm on a tangent again. My Lord, I apologize.
It's okay.
Thanks for your patience. But in that through line of the inequality and the disruption that it may be causing or it's not causing, or there's this financial crisis, it's not about hating the people who are coming here. You're not worse off because of these people. If you look at where the wealth is going today, who's building these bunkers? Yeah. Who's buying these yachts? Who's, maybe that's where the money is. Yeah. If you think it's a zero-sum game, why don't you look at that equation? Yeah. Not, my job because of I've lost my job because they moved in. Yeah. You shouldn't hate the other guy. You should hate your boss who wants to hire someone cheaper. Yes. Yes. I think I took it off topic there.
No, I understand. So it's I mean, I don't want to get too, based on class, but there is an element of solidarity among workers, wherever you're born, right? Yeah, and I think, in terms of the amount of wealth inequality and the intergenerational wealth that's going to accrue from that is potentially a real source of unrest in this country. And it seems that what the government proposes is really just, window dressing. Yeah. It's not enough. And
meanwhile, the media is saying it's the worst thing in the world. Yeah. They're trying to ensue hate because people read it or click on it.
Yes. So, it used to be in this country, if you work hard, get an education or not, if you just work hard, you can earn enough, buy your own house and support a family and get on the pension when you're retired. And when that goes, it's sort of, people become adrift. It's well, if I work hard,
what's the point?
I do all the things and I'm still poor, and that's enough to, incite a riot or, this is how revolutions come about, historically speaking. So I just think, it's more than just the housing crisis. It's what's the point of work?
Mm-hmm. If I'm not going to be able to get that house. Yeah. If I'm not going to be able to be a part of the home ownership society or class of this country.
Exactly.
Yeah. What's the point?
And I think for people who don't own a house, like it's quite infuriating to see house values just double every 10 years. And
especially in the centralised major cities.
Exactly.
So maybe there should be some decentralising.
Exactly.
Sorry,
so it comes back.
Call back.
Yes, well done. We certainly need to find ways to sort of decommodify housing, and I'm not a Marxist, but I think in this area of public policy that, I think some things should not be commodified. Education, housing, healthcare, basic things, Yeah. And so I think, we need to hold our Labor government to account, to uphold the Labor principles, to which they have, committed, because if we just sort of drift along this sort of neoliberal path, then there will be problems, I think, for this country down the track.
Yeah.
Not to be pessimistic. I want to end on a.
Well, we can end on something positive and optimistic.
Okay.
This will be the last question. We'll pack up because I think I've stolen so much of your time.
No, that's okay.
Catholic guilt, I guess. So if we get this right, our policies, our stories, our leadership, what kind of country, what kind of Australia could we build?
Well, first of all, I would like to see a parliament in Canberra that reflects society at large. So we can see ourselves in our political leaders, because right now I don't think that's the case. So we do need to have a greater sense of ownership in the democratic process. I would hope that the Australian government does find a way to make migration much more equitable and accessible, certainly in terms of allowing people on temporary migrants to shift pathways into a permanent stream and to give people that opportunity.
As opposed to bunny hopping between visas.
Exactly. You need to give people some kind of, security and permanence. Otherwise, it's very hard to plan in life. And that, just finally that, Australians see the value of expansive, non-discriminatory migration and what it's given us as a country, rather than just seeing it as, easy targets for scapegoating when things get tough. Instead, blame, the oligarchs and the people who own, 15 properties.
Or the media telling you to hate this, hate that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So just to be a bit more sort of conscious of who's really to blame for your plight. Certainly just to make sure that, we continue, I think, to sort of be an example to the world, in terms of how things should be in a migration, in a migrant nation, because we see how things can go wrong in the Middle East, Qatar and Kuwait, and that's horror stories of, workers dying on the site and on job sites, and we don't want to have a situation like the United States where, migrants are being deported for no reason. So I think, we do have a lot to offer, and just to be clear that, it's something that needs to be managed. You can't just put it on autopilot. It needs to be managed, and politicians need to articulate the case in a very clear way and compelling way,
Yeah. Migration isn't just a thing to plug holes in the economy. It's a tool that can be used.
Yeah, absolutely. For a variety of reasons. And it comes back to my point before about, well, what if we didn't have migration? What would we be as a country? And that would perhaps scare the bejesus out of many people, So I think there's a few things in an ideal world, and, none of them are impossible, to achieve. So, yeah.
And if there's any country that could do it, it will be the petri dish of Australia. We are the testing grounds for a lot of things that do get inherited globally.
Yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's been lovely to chat with you.
Yeah, let's pack it in. Get out of here. I'm so sorry. I'll get out of here. This is your building. I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, lovely chat. Many things that we talked about. That could go into further. Maybe I'll get in touch at some point if you want.
Yeah,
about certain topics.
No trouble.
Or you send me a list of things you want to talk about. Anyway, we'll say goodbye now. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
All right.